So in this segment, we're going to be talking about kind of the real another disgusting aspect of Labour, I think, when they're talking about showing they've shown videos of people being deported and arrested and things like that, and it's just completely dehumanising. And I think they're going to lose a lot of support that they would have had. I can't see a world where people, especially with minority backgrounds and people with an actual conscience, seeing this stuff and wanting to be able to back it, there's quite a lot to discuss here. So we've got, the person who's probably the best at the moment discussing this on LBC in Zoe Gardner.
They are releasing video footage. That is something that Donald Trump has been doing, showing people, in some cases, manacled, being forced onto planes, and that this is an escalation in a dangerous situation where we have seen violent riots on our streets 6 months ago, and we know that there is a far-right party that is gaining significant attention and support in this country. And we know that the mainstream right has been entirely captured by that far-right anti-migrant agenda. And what Labour is doing through releasing these videos is upping the ante. Because what we know for 100% sure, and you'll see, I'll put a bet down right now, Ben, that nobody who calls you in who's a Nigel Farage supporter is going to say that this is enough for them. They will have to go further now. And
that's what it is. I guarantee not what Farage is going to say, and I think I've seen him say some of the Reform UK guys say this, which is by the time all of these people are deported, there'll be even more people in here, and then Nigel will be like, we need to ask the question, how did they get here in the first place? That's what he's going to say, and he's going to say, I would have stopped them coming here in the first place, therefore we wouldn't have to deport them. It wouldn't have been an issue. So this interview here, there was another clip that I don't think I have it, where Kentish was talking about how this shows Labour are listening to certain groups of people and they're actually getting things like deportations done. Like, people aren't being deported all the time anyways after failed asylum claims is ridiculous. So the idea that this is going to be enough for people on the Reform end, or the racist people, is never enough. Nothing you do is ever enough. Even for Boris Johnson, like when Brexit happened, it was never enough. That's what they care about.
This is exactly the same conversation that I've been having for the last 5 years about Tory governments. It's exactly the same thing that the Conservatives were doing. And Labour was elected on a message, not of great detail, but of change and of scrapping the biggest, most visible symbol of Tory hostility towards refugees, which was the Rwanda plan. They said that's dead in the water on day one.
So the reason why they canned the Rwanda plan wasn't because of how barbaric it was, it's because of cost.
And that's what people voted for. I mean, it's easy to forget, given the media landscape that we live in and the political forces that we are ruled by. But actually, people voted for Labour on the basis that they weren't the Tories and the Reform Party, and they weren't the party that defined itself by hostility towards immigration. People voted for Labour because they wanted fairer taxation, more tax on billionaires. They wanted...
I don't think Labour really talked about more tax on billionaires, but I get her point. Sorry, I'm being pedantic here.
Protections for the environment, and they wanted, most of all, for our public services to be supported. And once again, Labour is failing to do that. It's got nothing to deliver on that front. And all it's doing is pivoting, just like the Tories did, back to giving migrants a kicking. And I think they'll learn that they're not only going to lose votes to the Reform Party at the upcoming local elections, they're going to hemorrhage votes to the Greens, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, SNP, because there are lots and lots of people who just didn't vote for this, who just don't want this.
She's 100% correct there. A lot of people who voted based on the economy and public services. And she's right about Labour taking this kind of right-wing turn on things like immigration, because the fact they have nothing else. They've speed run effectively Boris Johnson's tenure in government, where they had nothing to show for it apart from trying to reduce immigration numbers. That's all they had. It's crazy how fast this has happened. This is what happened. You have no economic plan whatsoever. When you talk a big game about change and talked about being better than the other guys and things like that. And I think the Greens will do okay of this. I think the Lib Dems will do the best of this, and the SNP. is they can push a more pro-immigration message and things like that in order to kind of take votes away from the Labour Party, because the Labour Party will lose core supporters, and that's something I'll talk about towards the end of the video. So I've got an article from one such, tier one kind of Labour glazer about this. And Labour are being asked about, is this actually going to be a deterrent, some of the stuff they're going to do, which is, I think they're going to stop anyone crossing via small boat having any chance of getting citizenship in this country, which is wild to me. So racist, that policy. So racist.
In this bill that would deter people from wanting to get into a boat in the first place.
What we have to do is smash the gangs. So
I saw No Justice talk about how they could just get Chat GPT to replace a lot of these MPs, and 100% I agree.
The physical ability of getting in those boats just stops.
But when you hit one gang, then another one pops up.
Yes,
I mean, it is like whack-a-mole.
I totally agree, it's whack-a-mole.
This is why you take away the incentive for gangs, and you set up either a way for people to claim asylum from where they are via an embassy, or you set up a facility in France, or you create safe points of entry, safe routes, so people can come here via ferry, for example, or via plane. They can get their asylum claim heard, and that way they don't need to rely on people smugglers. Like, I've been saying this for probably about 2 or 3 years now. It's really not hard. Genuinely, it's not hard. Like, the way you take away money from criminals is by taking away their incentive structure to sell the service or product they're selling. If you wanted to take away things like cannabis money from gangs, all you do is legalize cannabis. Jesus, guys, honestly.
So what would deter, put the gangs to one side, because there'll always be a gang. What would deter people from getting in the boat? What pushes the demand away?
The key is, if they do get across, that we process them quickly and we return them.
That's not a deterrent, is it?
It is, because there's no place in this country if you're an illegal migrant.
Yeah, but people don't want to sit in hotels all day. Or, we know that they get sick of it. Like, it's pretty bad for you mentally as well. What they want is their asylum claim to be heard. If they get deported, then they know that's a possibility for them. But what they want is their claim to be heard in this country. The idea of just processing claims quicker is good. Fundamentally, it's a good thing. Is it a deterrent? Not really.
That's the point.
I thought you wanted to stop them getting in the boats in the first place because it's dangerous.
That's the key. What we have to smash. We have to smash the gangs. And for example, we've been working with our international partners. We've been to Iraq. That's where most of the gangs are originating from, and we have deals with the Iraqi government in order to smash them there. We're working with other partners such as the German.
Maybe look at why people are leaving places like Iraq, for example. Why do we have massive refugee crises across the Middle East? Maybe stop defending certain regimes. Maybe that will help. I don't know.
Government, in partnership with them, they've just brought in legislation that makes it a crime if you're caught actually assisting in the transmission of illegal migrants across.
Sure, and that's all the law enforcement stuff.
Exactly.
I still don't hear what the deterrent is.
But also, we've just appointed at the beginning of the government.
With really basic questioning here, Victoria Derbyshire's made this Labour MP look incredibly stupid, and that's all they have to do. I do hold Victoria Derbyshire up as one of the best in terms of interviewers in Britain, 100%. But this is how weak Labour's arguments are, through basic questions of, well, what's the deterrent? I don't hear a deterrent. There is no deterrent. This Labour MP is absolutely collapsing before our eyes.
Appointed the border commander.
That's not a deterrent either.
But it's how effective. But it's how effective we are in smashing those gangs, because that's the mechanism by which people are brought. If we smash the gangs.
But again, she just told you there's going to be more gangs. Like, this is brutal.
And we actually stop that mechanism of bringing people across.
Do you think you can smash all the gangs?
I agree. It's a tough cookie.
You've gone through this with the war on drugs, guys. Like, you don't beat the gangs. You don't beat the cartels. It doesn't work. There'll always be someone new and potentially someone worse than the last lot.
Okay, it really is. I accept that, but we've got to do it, and we're determined.
I'd be embarrassed if I was her. I'd be so embarrassed if I was Joe White there. And, some of the stuff Labour are coming out with, this kind of fake Facebook conversation of, did you hear Labour are doing what Labour are doing about illegal immigration? No. Surely going to be tough to clean up the mess left by the Tories. They've already done a lot. They've removed more people with no right to be here, more right to be here than in any year since 2018. That's actually really interesting. They've also set up a border security command and invested heavily in tech and policing to stop the boat gangs exploiting people. Wow, looks like they hit the ground running. This is pathetic, guys. This is so pathetic. This is a Tory MP being interviewed about this kind of stuff.
In 2022, you introduced the Nationality and Borders Act. At the time, you said it would be a deterrent to people wanting to cross in small boats. It wasn't. So in 2023, you brought in the Illegal Migration Act. The aim, to deter people from crossing the channel in small boats. It failed. So in 2024, you brought in the Safety of Rwanda Act, which was supposed to send people to Rwanda, as we know, for processing. You said it would deter people from crossing the channel in small boats. It failed. So voters...
Well, it never started. It never started.
Okay, yeah, this one, guys, this one would have been it. You know, all the other failed schemes, you know, write-offs, you know, these things happen, you know. But we went back to the drawing board, guys, back in the lab, and we cooked up the Rwanda scheme. And I'm telling you now, it would have been a Michelin star dish if it wasn't for that pesky Labour government.
You said there would be a deterrent effect by even talking about it.
Well, and actually,
hang on. The point I'm reaching is, I mean, that's just a few years in government. Voters might reasonably think, you actually don't have a clue.
Well, look, the numbers across Europe were going up, but by 2023, including here, all right, across the Mediterranean, the numbers went up, and across the Channel as well. In 2023, so around about the time that legislation you referred to came into force, the Nationality and Borders Act 2022, for example, in 2023, the numbers here in the UK went down. We got the numbers down by 30%. Whereas across Europe, they were going up. Now, the Rwanda scheme never started, as I've said already, because of all the legal challenges. We had to pass a new Act of Parliament. Then the election happened early. One can debate the wisdom or otherwise of that. But the first
Sunak there.
Flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, and Labour cancelled it. Now, we've seen, as I said already, the experience with Australia about 10 years ago, that a deterrent works. I mean, it's common sense, right? If you're in France, and if you cross the channel by small boat, and you've got a pretty good chance of ending up being sent to Rwanda, or if
it wasn't anywhere near a pretty good chance, it was very low because Rwanda didn't have that much space for anyone, and even then, like, you saw more, you know, the chance of being sent to Rwanda were very low. So this argument doesn't make sense, and obviously, you know, him arguing the flights were taken off around the 24th of July, but we know there would have been you know, the ECHR would have got involved again around that. So it's just garbage. You know, she did a really good job there piecing them up on this stuff. So a lot of credit to you there. More Labour nonsense.
Thousands of doors during the election campaign. Person after person told me they wanted to have secure borders. And there's nothing left-wing about having criminal smuggling gangs taking advantage of these vulnerable people.
Do you know what the left-wing answer would be, pal? It would be to have safe routes of entry and actually have a humanitarian effort to actually help people, rather than doing what you guys are doing, which is exploiting people, using them for state propaganda in these deportation videos. That's what would be happening, mate. Also, the right-wing answers of trying to, you know, stopping the smuggling gangs is fine and all, but again, you know, you're just using the stick, and it's not going to work. That's the problem. These people are desperate. You should have set up the processing centre in France, you dumb clown.
A profit out of human misery. So it's great to see the government doing this work. We've got foreign national offenders removed up, the total number of removals of those with no right to be here up, and as you talked about, some of the enforcement action is up as well.
What do you say to those who say, well, actually showing pictures of people in handcuffs being led off for deportation is dehumanising and is bad for the image of migrants generally?
Well, I mean, looking at the footage, it looks like...
I can't wait for some idiot to see this video, or to see you know, people being deported and look at me and say, oh, I can't wait for you to get sent home, pal.
People being escorted onto a plane. I don't think it's particularly upsetting. If those people have not got the right to be in the UK, then it's right that the government should...
It's propaganda, because if you are actually serious about this stuff, again, it would just reflect in the numbers, and that's all you'd have to push. You wouldn't have to push propagandistic videos about you deporting people. And, you know, I did see Zoe Gardner clip where she talked about how, you know, Ben Kentish, again, tried to use the argument of, well, this is third on, you know, people's list of things they care about, because it's all the media talks about. Because, again, it gets clicks, it's salacious, but also the fact they don't want to talk about other stuff, like the state of the economy, because that's more complicated. People will get bored, but also they don't know how to explain it. A lot of these people, they don't have any kind of inkling to understand economics. Like when you had Laura Kuenssberg talking about how the countries are maxed out the credit cards. It's garbage. But this is another one. It's a good clip where, you know, Reform are being questioned on what they're actually going to do.
No, please.
You just put on deterrent is the key thing.
No, I'm asking you,
yeah,
how would
Reform
do it? Do they have a plan? You may not know what that plan is. That's fine if you don't. I'm just asking if you do.
No, I'm trying to say that your persistent question to Joe about there being a deterrent, Rwanda wasn't really ever going to work.
So what would be Reform's?
Okay,
what would be Reform's deterrent then?
What Reform need to come up with, and I don't think they've got it yet, is a policy that has the elements of Rwanda that involves a punishment for people who come here illegally. So there's a downside rather than just a quick processing. But actually we have an arrangement with someone, not necessarily Rwanda, where actually thousands, as many people as need be, can be deported.
Right.
Because
it's going to cost a fortune to do something like that. An absolute fortune. You can have loads of court rulings, but again, this will give them the cover they need if they want to leave something like the ECHL, for example. And that's exactly what they want. So Reform clearly don't have an answer because this guy's a Reform insider. You got this poster here from the Labour Party. Tory and Reform MPs failed to back Labour's plan to secure our borders, talking about their stupid policy, which I think it's a rehash of the Tory one, which would take away people's human rights. It would stop them being eligible for the Modern Slavery Act and things like that. Again, they just push this nonsense propaganda, and like I said, in my tweet, Nigel's going to eat this up. Nigel's going to say, I'll deport even more people. I'll make Labour's numbers look like a joke. Like Labour will never go far enough. And that's what he'll do, because you bought into his argument already of, there needs to be more deportations. What he's going to do is tell you he would invest more money into it. And then you look stupid, because why would people vote for diet fascism when they can have the full thing? It doesn't make sense, does it? This is from the Refugee Council.
You are comfortable with this because you were always somebody who was speaking up for
quotes from the Refugee Council. Andrew Barr's going to cite them.
The rights of migrants, and now
I will continue to do so.
The Refugee Council and many others are saying this is dehumanising. We hate these images. We hate this sign. This is not what we expected of a Labour government.
I want to tell the other story here, which is that we're talking about 16% of the total immigration concern in this country. We're talking about 2/3 of the people who are on the boats get granted asylum, and that was under the last government as well as this government, which tells you something about the challenges around the world. So when I talk about the pieces of the puzzle, I'm comfortable with this legislation because it repeals the Rwanda legislation. I think it needs some work. I want to tighten up the...
Again, you don't need really bad legislation to repeal the Rwanda legislation. You can just repeal it. It's not hard. I think a lot of these Labour MPs have been sucked into this idea that they need to back a very kind of, some aspects of right-wing Labour government here. And it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest with you, because politicians are probably the cheapest and easiest people to sell out there. Any kind of record or principles or credentials, they'll sell them down the river if they have to. Anything for power is tragic.
The definitions around when people can be deported, but actually I want us to get on with working with our colleagues in Europe on a return.
You keep saying that you're going to work on getting a return scheme with Europe. I don't see it happening because of the fact that we left the EU, and that was one of the benefits of being in the EU, the Dublin III agreement. Why would any of those EU countries really bail us out of this situation? It doesn't make sense. And this from Lewis Goodall talking about how really everyone. Oh, sorry, this is Diane Abbott talking about this.
All they're trying to do is placate potential reform voters. And my view is, far from placating people who are thinking about reform, it just reinforces reform's arguments and makes it more likely that people will vote for the real thing.
But there's nothing left-wing, is there, Diane Abbott, about wanting to ensure that people who have broken the rules... Who's broken the rules? There's no rule against coming to a country and claiming asylum, even if you do it through irregular means. There's no rule against it, Goodall pal. Smuggling gangs, who I think we can all agree are appalling, wanting to make sure that the law is enforced. There's nothing right-wing about doing those things.
Forgive me, Lewis, I am not saying that a fair and ethical approach to migration is in some way left-wing. I'm saying it's the right thing to do, and in the end, it stops you playing to reform's tune.
She's right there. Maybe I'm a bit mean to Goodall there because he does play devil's advocate a lot, but sometimes it's really hard to tell with journalists, are they playing devil's advocate or are they not? It's really, really difficult. But I think this one's a different clip from Goodall, which is better.
A bit of a fallacy which has gripped part of the left, part of liberalism, that it is somehow inherently right-wing or inherently authoritarian to be tough on illegal migration and even to be, at times, tough on border policy in general. The solidarity on which any kind of social democratic liberal system depends relies on a sense from the population at large that the rules are being observed and enforced. The problem, the gap that creeps in, the void that hard right, populist right, far right, whatever it happens to be, the gap that is filled by those forces takes place and occurs when there is a perception that those rules are not being enforced.
Which is true. That's something where the Tories and the Reform Party have done really well with, talking about how it's unfair that people crossing the channel are queue jumping. The problem is no one's really bothered to explain the fact that there's no other means for these people to seek asylum in this country apart from crossing the channel. There's no actual means for someone from Afghanistan, for example, to come here, despite the fact we promised them refuge. But if you're from Hong Kong, for example, you can fly here to have your asylum, if you have your asylum claim granted. It doesn't make sense.
Nigel Farage and the populist right are playing and calling all of the tunes and the shots. Despite the fact he only has 5 MPs, despite the fact that he's not consistently leading in the polls, albeit he's certainly first, second or third, depending on which poll you look at, he has both Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer running after him. There is another way.
That's what I mean by it's hard to see when he's playing devil's advocate. Maybe I'm a bit mean, but he's right there. He's right. And, the idea or the argument of we need to listen to people's concerns on immigration because it's in the top 3 or whatever, it's because it's been put there by people like Farage constantly being platformed, and again by the media. We saw that with Brexit. The EU wasn't an issue for people, and then suddenly it was, and then suddenly it wasn't again. It's because it's what people perceive. When it's constantly in the media, that's what people get at, and that's why press reform was so important. But Labour fumbled that one. They did it all to win one election, really, and I don't know what they do from here.
Of looking at it, which is that the more that you play into this narrative, the more that you follow Farage, the more that you play on his turf, on his terrain, the more likely you are to lose. That Labour is never going to be viewed as being as tough on immigration as Reform. That's just a losing political battle. No matter what you do, you're never going to be seen as tough as Farage is.
He's 100% correct there. Part of me is tempted to do a separate video on this, but he's 100% right. You're never going to out Farage. It's just not going to happen. I might do a separate video on this, actually. But yeah, no, because this one's spot on. It's absolutely spot on. The fact that, they've been baited so hard by Farage, and again, I think Labour are baited because they haven't got the economic success that they need. That's all it is. They haven't got anything to really run on apart from, hate migrants, brown people bad. That's it. And the one person I actually give credit for, because there's a lot of people who don't deserve any credit here, is Super Tansky, ironically. You got to give credit where it's due, and some people are right when they're, once in a while. And, she's talking about here, Reform has the press following them about, like, they're the Spice Girls, which is true. So Labour improving finances isn't enough. Biden fixing the economy didn't stop Trump. It's a disinfo war. She's kind of wrong there because of the fact that although Biden did grow the American economy, inflation was completely dire over there, and there wasn't enough support given to people or enough done to sort out price gouging, which was a real problem in America. So I think Biden really refused to do much on. She talks about press reform being the bare minimum, which again, I've already talked about that. She talks about their approach to social media and comms is dire. Bending over backwards to appease Murdoch or trying to imitate the right wing will not help matters. The billionaire press barons only care about money, not policy, nor even Britain. Again, a lot of this she's 100% correct on. And this is a more recent tweet, I think, about this, where she's talking about if Labour mimics the far right BS of Reform with this BS and dawn raids, they'll guarantee a far right government in 5 years. Reform idiots won't care, and they'll lose all of us that helped their win with tactical voting. They're effing this up really badly. You don't defeat the far right by emulating the scumbags. You don't represent Labour voters by becoming everything they voted against. Her language is a lot more vulgar than stuff I'd say. She talks about the importance of generating real hope and goodwill. They're not, they're messing up everybody, which again is 100% true. There's that Kendrick Lamar song where he talks about how he it's time to watch the party die effectively, and I would play it if I didn't get copyrighted, but I think it's 100% true. Is 100% right on this, because here we have Ian Dunn, who's one of Starmer's biggest supporters here, a guy like I said, a tier one Starmer glazer up there with Bowler Hatman and Phil Morehouse, tier one Labour glazers, saying there's no way to justify this. There's no strategic basis, no political basis, and most of all, no moral basis. Yesterday evening, we learnt that Labour is going to prevent refugees from ever becoming citizens of Britain. So this is when this is, I think, specifically about people who cross the channel. Those people will not be eligible for British citizenship if they have their asylum claim heard here, if it's granted, and there is a path to citizenship for those people. Well, Starmer wants to take it away. People ask about Starmer's politics, argue there is none. Columnists would write him off as a vacillating opportunist, which I agree with, but it's always seemed to me rather obvious what he believed in, because he kept saying it. He stood for dignity in work, dignity in material and social life. The thing is, like, this is stupid. Because he said something doesn't mean it's true. Anyone who takes a politician by their word is a complete moron. And also, you know, David Cameron, all of these people talk about dignity in work and things like that. Tom Baldwin's biography of the Labour leader included a telling story from when he used to live abroad, live above a brothel in his youth with. Almost in passing, a friend mentioned that he offered legal advice to the women working there. He believed they should have dignity no matter who they were. This belief in dignity also shone through when Starmer spoke of how his father was treated as a blue-collar worker, or his view of the importance of football clubs for the local area. So he's been real suckered in here, like I said. But, you know, he talks about how he thought Starmer was a decent man. In recent weeks, Labour have been making overtures towards potential reform voters. We know why. A recent opinion poll showed the party breathing down Labour's neck and found 37% of its supporters want hardline policies on immigration. And this is where Labour is going to split. They're going to be split really badly on this stuff, because there'll be a lot of people who won't back this, and a lot of people who either won't turn out, they might vote for the Lib Dems, they might vote for the Greens, and you got the racist ones who are going to vote for reform because they're morons, and they think Nigel will bail them out, even though in America we can see Trump had no plan to deal with the problems they were facing. All he's doing is raiding people's, you know, houses and businesses in immigration raids. That's it. He goes, and yesterday it emerged that they had done something else. The Free Movement website, which specialised in immigration law, discovered something alarming. The Home Office has issued guidance to immigration caseworkers that anyone who has entered the UK in an unauthorised manner, which accounts for almost all refugees, should never be given citizenship. Electorally, it will accomplish nothing. I can't imagine a single vote will be affected by this, because again, all Farage is going to say, they would never have made it here in the first place. There isn't one wavering Labour reform voter who will be swayed by it. If this is some kind of thing that appeals to them, they will simply vote for the full-fat Nigel Farage version. Labour seem incapable of remembering that Liberal left voters also have options for whom to support. 3 in 10 of its voters would consider supporting reform, but 4 in 10 would consider voting for the Lib Dems or the Greens, and I imagine in Scotland it'd be the SNP as well. And this is the thing, like, you know, Starmer was very lucky to have such a coalition of Tory haters, let's be honest now, people who hated the Conservative Party more than anything. And so they voted for Labour, despite all the nonsense, despite the fact they weren't as pro-EU as they wanted, or as good on the economy as they wanted, and they said all sorts of bad things regarding welfare recipients and others. People held their nose and they voted for the Labour Party, and now we're seeing in this case a Labour Party that's more right-wing on some aspects than even the Tories were. It's crazy, isn't it? Labour seem incapable of remembering that Liberal left voters also have options. I mentioned that. Nor is there any support for tightening citizenship rules. You know, there's something Badenoch was talking about, suggested making citizenship harder to attain by forcing immigrants to wait 15 years for eligibility. Fewer than 1 in 10 people supported the idea. And again, that could shift depending on how polling goes. You know, like I said, the public are very fickle on a lot of things. And he talks about why, because even those who are sceptical of immigration want people to integrate. They want them to become British, to involve themselves in the country. Not everyone wants that. You know, there's a lot of racists who don't like people like me. Now Labour has managed to inexplicitly replicate the most unpopular and reactionary elements of the leader of the opposition's programme. The policy is almost certainly illegal. Labour managed to sneak it out as guidance to caseworkers. So again, if the caseworkers do it, it's not their fault. That's what they can argue. This means that it's not primary or even secondary legislation. I mean, this is the height of cowardice. At least be open and brazen with your racism, like Nigel was towards Romanian people during the Brexit referendum. You know, this is cowardice. This is cowardly racism. As the legal expert Colin Yeo pointed out, the Refugee Convention bars signatories from imposing penalties on refugees and demands they make every effort to expedite naturalisation proceedings. Starmer has a proud history of standing up for international law in his legal career. He used to fight against the death penalty, and this, I mean, he ran on a record which simply should not exist for him anymore, purely because of the fact that he's a fraud. You know, he has an illustrious career, a good career, but ultimately it doesn't mean anything now because he's proved himself to be a fraud. He's proved himself to be a guy who can't be taken seriously anymore. You can't stand on a record that you've completely, essentially dissolved purely because of the fact that you were a good guy in the past. There are lots of people who are good people in the past and they're scumbags now. The real argument against this policy is not electoral or even legal, it is moral. We are talking about refugees here, not asylum seekers, not people smugglers. These are people who have had their claims accepted, who are fleeing war and oppression. The Labour policy would deny them citizenship in perpetuity. They would be second-class citizens forever, no matter how many decades they stay in this country, no matter how loyal they feel towards it. the policy is a rejection of the concept of equality, is a rejection of the concept of dignity, it is an affront to any of the values which this government was supposed to hold: decency, fairness, the rule of law. Is a rejection of the values which Starmer was supposed to hold, which his supporters believed him to hold. Perhaps some of those around Starmer thinks good that liberal voices squeal in anguish at what they're doing. Perhaps they consider it sensible to alienate the very people who support them, but there will be now fewer people who are prepared to go out and defend this administration, and that's what they need, because their MPs are trash at it. We've already covered enough clips where Labour MPs fail to defend their positions. Ultimately, it's people in the media who do a better job, but this policy here, indefensible, and this will be very much a dam-breaking moment where people are going to look at this Labour government and think, nah, I can't do it. I can't defend these policies. Not anymore. That's what happened to Boris Johnson in the end. Perhaps he talks about how people in Starmer's cabinet don't care about liberal voices. Perhaps Labour are going to look at securing the red wall and more kind of those kind of areas, rather than looking at the broader coalition that they've kind of built in order to kind of secure their win. It didn't work for Rishi Sunak, but there's a big difference between 5 years and 14 years. Talks about there will be fewer advocates who can find themselves to back it, and the radio waves and TV studios will be filled even more than what they are by sounds of their enemies. There is still time for the government to reverse this policy. It must do so urgently, for its own good, for the principles of international law, and for the basic values that the government is supposed to stand for. And you can see here kind of Ian Dunt realising that Starmer isn't a good person. He always held the idea that Starmer believed in dignity and that maybe he would do the wrong things but for the right reasons. But I think here, he's part of the club that's, effectively seen the party die here. And I think that's ultimately what it is. It's sad more than anything. We're less than a year into this administration and we've seen really far right turns from the Labour government. It makes me sad more than anything. Again, I voted for the Green Party, so I don't feel that bad about it, to be honest. But in my soul, again, this is the government that represents this country, and they're treating people, abhorrently, and they are kowtowing to the right wing, and that will impact me as a person who is Asian. It's on my skin. I'm melanated. I don't want to go back to a time like in my dad's time where people called him Paki and stuff like that, publicly. These are the kind of policies that will push that, deportations, being really public about how they're dealing with this stuff. I think it's just silly. And all that's going to happen is you're going to get pieced up by Farage, because Farage said, I would have stopped these people coming here in the first place. I would have secured the borders properly. Unlike you guys, what are you guys going to do, to secure it? It's not going to work. And that's all he needs. He needs just these certain policies to fail, just like it did for the Tories, because we know it doesn't work. These policies are not good. But again, this is the Labour government. We watch the party just die, guys. I think this is the end. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.